Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the episode Division from Season 7. We'll kick off this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives. And just a quick shout out and a big thank you to everyone who gave me clarification over a couple things from the previous episode. Your comment will be read out towards the end of this episode. But between then and now, let's talk about the headline positives for this particular episode. And I have to say that this was a decent episode overall, despite being mostly set up. It dealt with the exposition in the early half of the episode very well, and it does set up for some interesting things to come later in the series. And yes, quite literally later in the series, this is pretty much where we're parking the bus for the next year and a half or so. I will say that, and this might seem like damning with faint praise, but I felt that the pacing was generally okay for me. Look, the pacing for what it is was good. It did everything that it needed to. Nothing felt as though it was dragging too much. Nothing felt as though it was being run through too quickly. Despite the fact this episode felt incredibly front-loaded with exposition, but of course it more than makes up with that going forward, with just how action-orientated it gets into the second half of it. But this is more of a me issue, so I won't conclude this as a negative. Look, I'm not a fast reader, and I'm reading this subtitled. I'm dyslexic, I have struggled with reading, so when they're just going through exposition, there's some of it that just kind of went over my head or just didn't quite land for me. And it's not a criticism with this. Again, I watch it subtitled because I prefer the voice acting in this versus the English language dub. But pacing-wise, it did good for me. Any issues that I have with it are more of a me issue than a issue with the series itself. Like I say, the front of this episode was very much front-loaded with exposition, which I will say it does get better as the episode goes along, and how it actually explains all of this is good. It isn't just all exposition. We do get a lot of saying, but we get far more seeing. We get to see these plans being put into action and how they got to where they are. The first half of this episode is pretty much the entirety of, this is what our plan was to get AFO, this is how we bamboozled AFO. And whilst there is a part of me that would have rather got into the action sooner, I do like what we ended up seeing. I will admit, there is a part of me that is still slightly disappointed at the fact that they didn't run with the idea of AFO having something of a blind spot in his power, or his powers not quite working the way that he quite expected them to do so. But I will say is that they are able to overcome that issue that I have with it by just doing such a great job in coming up with something plausible in place of that. Yes, there is still a part of me that would have liked to have seen that stuff live, so to speak, see it happening in the course of the episodes rather than being a flashback. But I do understand that had they done that, there is the risk of them setting up expectations of failure. You know, we'll have all these scenes of these characters doing their bit, but doing it chronologically rather than as in flashback. We'll have all the scenes of planning, and there'll be that part in the back of your mind going, okay, so how are they going to bugger this up? And in the end, they didn't. The plan has largely worked for the most part for what it is, and I think that is good. I like the way the plan is put together. I like the way it's executed. We'll see exactly how it all goes on a more structural level as we go forward. What I really do like is the fact that we end up utilising characters that we have not seen in a very, very long time. Sure, in the context of this series, in the context of this series of events, it's only been a matter of weeks and months, but I think with some of these are characters we've not seen in a good couple of years, so hey, they're back, and they're helping out in ways that feel practical and logical given their skill set and their powers. There is an element of the why don't they call in Iron Man kind of thing with these characters, where, to explain that, I remember a few years back where I was watching the Netflix Marvel series and the comment came up with the people that I was watching it of, well, why don't they just call in Daredevil? Because, you know, he's dealt with weird ninja guys before and they seem the same, so why don't they just exchange notes? Which is ultimately what they did in The Defenders, and no one liked The Defenders, but that's a discussion for all of a time. But it is good to see them utilising these extra characters and using their powers because of just, well, quite frankly, how useful they are and how important they are to the series of events. Purple Man is back, kind of, sorta, also on the hero course, but kind of, sorta, also not. I mean, it's good to see him. It's good to see him in action. It's good to see, effectively, Eraserhead Mark II on the scene. I will say is that there was a part of me that was just thinking it would be a case of, because like I knew the whole thing about Midoriya leaving UA well in advance, so there's a part of me that just flicked back to that and thinking, Okay, so if Midori isn't at UA anymore, who takes his seat in Class 1A? Oh, maybe it's him. And there's a kind of part of me that was thinking, okay, so that time that Midori wasn't there, maybe he was put onto that course. That would have been a fun little thing. Of course, there is the bit where Nezu talks about, oh, don't worry, everybody, he's been given a special license to take part in all of this. And I'm just thinking to myself, that doesn't matter, the entire country's on fire! Law and order doesn't matter. You don't need a license at this point. Any nut with a gun can end up becoming a superhero at this point in the story. Licensing, it doesn't matter. Of course, I suppose that's for the sake of all the people that might get a little bit alarmed about the morality of just letting this guy go up and beat people up for trying to save the... whatever. I'm getting off in a tangent, but still, that was a very silly moment. It's something that didn't need to be said. It felt like adding a little bit into the craft of everything I don't think was necessarily needed, but hey, that's not what they're here for. They're here to try and help save the day. They're help to try and bamboozle AFO. It seems as though in the time that they've been absent from this series, they've got a secret power boost. They've come to understand their powers a little bit better. There is a part of me that feels as though they weren't necessarily needed. The quirk as described by AFO is that it helps him detect lies and malice in what things people are saying. So you could argue that if the person talking to them just stuck to the facts and did it as emotionlessly as possible, that it could work. Emphasis on the word could, so I suppose that bringing in a guy who could help them say this stuff without triggering any kind of alarm bells is probably a more practical way of making sure this plan doesn't go to hell before it even starts. His return, I will admit that whilst it is appreciated, it feels a tad on the emotionless side. It does feel like a case of, well, let's bring this guy in because we need to, and because he has the power that we need, more so than a real true reunion and an exploration of the character. It wasn't quite as impactful as the Phantom Thief guy coming back. The brief bit of backstory that we got with him was neat. I would have appreciated a little bit more was done with them, but truly I don't think you could really have said much else with them. But given just how much we've got left of all of this, it wouldn't surprise me if we got some kind of flashback sequence and backstory deep dive with them at some point in the not too distant future. It is his time to shine and to prove himself and to prove to all those who doubted him that he's the real deal, and a great big to them. Get it? Perfectly good, perfect fine, good. It adds a little bit more of an emotional core to this episode, which I do feel it was kind of needing. There is the whole meta angle of being a side character when, well, everyone is a side character to someone else's story, or someone else's life story, I should say. And if we want to really get onto a meta level, him helping out in the way that he is doing doesn't stop him from being a side character, unless he becomes more of a focus going forward. But again, that'll be stuff that's just done for the sake of building him out and building him up for possibly disaster, given how these things end up going. The action, when we did end up getting into it, was solid, and I will admit is far better than what we've seen thus far. The staging, cinematography and shot composition had a dynamism that has been, frankly, rather painfully missing up until this point. I wanted more, quite frankly. As I said earlier on in this review, I would have been far happier had we got into the action far sooner, but what we got instead of that were the explorations and deep dives into how exactly their plan was all put together. I do appreciate, and upon reflection, now sat here and having a little bit of a moment going off script, I will say is that I am glad that they did go into the backstory of it, because in hindsight it did feel a little bit too quick. Like they go from, okay, we're going to use Aoyama to bamboozle All For One. Oh no, All For One's brought in his guys. Don't worry, we're bringing in our guys! Okay, so how did they add this? How are they using that power now? This is Kurigui, or whatever his name is, now on side and helping now? Well, now we have explanation for it. Phantom Thief just borrowed his quirk for a little bit. I think it's good. The animation in the action sequence and the animation overall just really kicks it up a notch when we start getting into the action half of the episode. The animation on Dabi at some points was honestly rather fantastic. That sheer, sadistic, twisted, hateful smirk that he has on his face in certain shots is great. That creepy, nasty, insidious look that he has. The just hollow, emotionless expression that Tomura has is great and haunting and creepy. I think that Dabi's new costume does help to highlight his facial expressions a lot more, given the way that his character is designed. And of course, there are some neat background designs as well. Some background characters do look interesting. Some I have always enjoyed, particularly back towards the start of the series as a whole, was the fact of you'd see all these really cool and interesting looking background characters with, you can kind of guess what their quirk is and what their power is, and it always made the crowd shots look a lot more interesting than in certain other shows. You know, you'd see someone in the back with a tap in the middle of the head. You'd see someone with, like, horns sticking out of their eyes. Oh, that looks cool and interesting. But in recent years and in recent series, the background characters just been generic person, generic person, generic person. This week, we don't get that. We get some truly outlandish designs for some of these side and background villains, like a guy who looks like a bar of soap. But not Puddingwell soap. The soap of people who have really stepped in it. I will say is that the division didn't quite happen how exactly I thought it was going to happen, but I suppose how I thought it was going to happen wouldn't have been interesting. It would effectively just boil down to just distracting them and pulling them away. But the League of Villains aren't that stupid. They're not just going to go, oh, hey, that guy, I really want to punch him. I'm going to go over there and punch them. Oh, they're leading me 20 miles away. I'm still going to follow them. Oh, no, I'm the other side of Japan. I'm still going to follow them. Still, how it works is good for what it is. I don't think the Trojan code name really works in this context, but hey-ho, doesn't matter. I suppose it's just a cool, badass name they could use to explain all of this. The division itself and the locations that they arrived in was interesting. The whole drama of are they going to actually get people separated or not as the villains are trying to burst through it is a good little bit of tension. I like that. It's good for what it is. The issue that I have isn't so much that whole sequence of events, it's more the locations that they arrive in. And I don't mean thematically, I just mean that the places that they arrive in, it does feel like something out of a fighting game. Like, we have the thing with Tomura being taken to a copy of UA. Like, why? Why specifically UA? I suppose that maybe Midoriya had some big speech lined up, something he'd been working on to try and make Tomura realise, look, you don't need to do this. You could have been the hero. Now's the time for you to be the hero and to reject All For One and to really be the person that you should always have been and to reach down into them and say that you could be a hero, you don't need the power to be a hero. Just that kind of big speech you'd expect from him. But then he gets separated so he can't do the speech. Like, I could easily see a thing is because he and the rest of them are fighting on the beach, and he just gets knocked into the water and he reaches his pocket and it's all the speech written out for him and all the ink started to, oh no! Now I've got to improvise it. I'm going to have to freestyle when I eventually get to him, whenever that might be, probably in the season or so's time. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you, that whilst I did have issues with that, it's not big issues, and I will say is that it does set up for some interesting and far more visually interesting action sequences later on when we eventually get to them. And I will admit that it's not much for me to talk about with this episode on a deeper level because it is mostly set up and it's mostly focused around actions. There's no real big deep dives into characters and backstory and lore and anything like that. It's mostly just, okay, we're getting ready to go to the fireworks factory. We're almost at the fireworks factory. We're now walking into the fireworks factory. What happens from this point out, we'll see in the next few weeks and months and probably a year and a half, depending on how they actually pace all of this out. And of course we get right at the end of the episode that Mirko, when she got fingered by the... Jesus Christ. Fuck it, we're leaving that in. When she got attacked by the wall of fingers that just got shot out from Tomura, that, oh, the Eraserhead thing isn't erasing all the quirks. Okay, but I thought that was the case last time. Like when Tomura was fighting earlier in the fight last season, they were only blocking his erasing, his decay power. They weren't blocking the other powers that he had. So, I don't know, maybe it's just that Phantom Thief hasn't realised it and he thought, oh, he's not going to have any powers whatsoever. He's going to be totally vulnerable. Oh, no, he isn't. He's just murdered one of the fan-favourite characters. Maybe. We'll soon find out. Anyway, with all that said, let us pivot into the negatives, and there aren't that many. And once again, we start out with a nitpick, but to be fair, this isn't aimed at the episode itself. In the version of the episode that I watched towards the start of the episode, there were a few lines that just weren't translated. It's shortly after All Might does his "I'm back, like I always am, every day at this school," or whatever. Shortly after that, as we start to pivot into the new dialogue, there's a good couple lines where no subtitles came up whatsoever, and that made me worry that that was going to be the case for the rest of the episode, that they hadn't loaded in the right files or what have you. That wasn't the case. It did distract me, and it meant I kind of missed out on some details of it, which... nothing to do with the episode itself, nothing to do with the writing itself, it's more of a Crunchyroll issue, but hey, Crunchyroll wouldn't be Crunchyroll if it didn't have issues. The other problem that I have is with the whole thing of the fighting game arena for the divisions. Like, it's not a major issue, and I do get it, I appreciate it, and there is a part of me that in the back of my head just kind of goes, okay, Chris, so what would be the alternative? Our characters split them up and they're now fighting in some kind of nondescript wasteland with a bunch of hoodoos in the background, or they're fighting in generic grassy field number 4, or ruined cityscape, or city that we haven't seen before, because, you know, I certainly haven't seen enough cities getting blown up over the past few years. You know, this is a better alternative. It gives us some more thematic and more dynamic and interesting locations that our characters can end up fighting in. I understand that it's good, even if the locations themselves do feel a little bit fighting gamey. You know, you have the hero hangout, and then you have the nondescript villain ruins, and then you have the beach level, and... okay, get it, okay, good. Let's hope that these locations, when they actually do end up using it and the fighting actually kicks off, they're gonna end up playing into it a little bit. Even if just for the sake of a gag, I'd be perfectly fine with that. They've got the fight with Uraraka, I think Froppy, and Midoriya and Toga at the beach resort, and I'd be perfectly fine if a character just, in an act of desperation, just squirted, like, suntan lotion to make someone trip up, like someone at Home Alone. I'd be fine with that for the sake of a gag, because I'm got a feeling that, good God, we're gonna desperately need some brevity coming forward and some levity. Or some levity, not brevity, because if we got any more brevity with this program, the series will be ending in about 5 episodes. But anyway, into the overview, and I have to say that this is a very strong episode in its own right. Yes, it is mostly set up, but understandably so. I am interested to see where they end up going with all of this, because let's be honest, we are very much stepping through the door of the fireworks factory. We're very much about to get into the beginning of the end, as certain commenters from last week ended up pointing out. With that said, let us get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. I still can't afford a jingle, especially after recent unforeseen expenses. Oh no. We kick off Comment Corner with Big X1, who says, I like the episode and I'm really looking forward to next week. This goes into last week's episode and now, well, this week's episode as well. Thank you for your comment. I've been looking forward to this week's episode too, but I think it's fair to say I'm probably looking forward to next week's episode even more. Next up, we have Scott TV Gamer with one hell of a comment, and it is incredibly extensive, and I say this with all due respect, I'm not going to be reading the whole thing out, but I will be giving an abridged summary. By all means, read through their comment. There's going to be screenshots of it on the screen. If you need it in a bigger, better quality, just go back to the previous video and just read it in the comment section therein. You can, again, you've got the screen grab in front of you. So, to abridge what they're saying and to add my own comments of it, they discuss about the scene with Toga and how apparently she didn't necessarily kill the person that she attacked. She just brutally maimed them, because we know how her quirk and how her quirk impacts on her personality. They do talk about how the scene itself does feel out of place, but it did debut around this point in the manga. So whilst it does feel out of place, it is landing pretty much where it would need to end up going. I found, like I say last week, the whole scene with Toga to be interesting, but I still feel as though it probably would have been better suited to be more of its own thing. To have such a deeper and more, at times, horrific dive into the backstory of a character, I think he's better suited into moments like this between the action, more so than inevitably we're probably going to get more flashback sequences with this character going forward. When they're in the fight, there's probably going to be a flashback sequence of them reflecting on their past and their feelings and such, which, whilst I doubt it will be good, I still think it'd probably be better in situations like this where it came up between storylines. They go on to talk about All For One's comments about the quirk Doomsday, and basically that it's Tomer defying the expectations and regaining control of his quirk when it really should be too hard for him to control, and it's him defying expectations in more of a way than necessarily... Well, he is overcoming it, given the way that it's described and the way it's put forward. I still think there's a little bit of smoke there. I still think that AFO is getting a little bit beyond himself, but hey-ho, he's the villain, he can do that. And then they go on to talk about how this is effectively, where this week's episode on this point out, is effectively the beginning of the final action sequence. This isn't going to be a one-and-done thing. This isn't going to be something that's going to be wrapping up soon. It's going to be running into next season. How well or not they'll end up pulling it off, personally, I don't know. It will be interesting to see how they do it, but hey, they managed to keep this whole storyline going for like the past couple years, so it must be working, I suppose, if it was able to pull it out for so long. And of course, the series now, I think, is in its final few episodes, or final few chapters of the manga. But with that said, I was saying that like a year ago, so who knows? Still, I'm interested to see where all this ends up going. And finally, last but by no means least, we have Real Taonua, who says, okay, this is the final arc. This is the longest arc in the entire manga, though. So we aren't going to see this as a series, see all of this season. So think of this as the final season part 1, because as you can imagine, there's a lot to cover. I can imagine it because some people have already spoke to me. Whatever. Also, the Goopy quirk All For One news, that's not cloning, that's the quirk warping, as seen back in Season 3. If it was cloning, the group would be in a brown colour, which would have come out of his body directly. Whereas warping, the quirk appeared in mid-air, although it's understandable for the confusion with the quirk, as warping was grey coloured in Season 3 and 6, but blackish coloured in Season 4 and 7, which does confuse people a lot. Thank you for your comment, and I have to say thank you for the insight. I have to appreciate the fact that a lot of you in the comments on the previous episode did clarify as to what was going on with all of that. There was a part of me that was wondering, are these just clones, or are these people being teleported in or not? And I am thankful for what you've all said to me. It really does appreciate, and thank you all for doing so. By all means, leave a comment down below if you want to let me know what you're going to be talking about and what your thoughts and feelings of this episode was. I've just seen how long this review has been going for, so I'll just say thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!